All right, speaking of planes, let's get down to the dirty and the nasty, the perverted and the cruel, the perverse, the insane. How's that for a start? Does that sound good? Welcome to the earth plane, and welcome to perhaps the most unusual aspect of the way in which we are programmed. In fact, the earth plane is truly not programming. That's the interesting thing. I mean, the above and below is programming. The personality crystal consciousness programming, the design crystal consciousness programming. I mean, that's real programming. That's where, both sides of the story and the binary do their work at, conditioning us while we sleep. But the earth plane is solely for the purposes of homogenization. I mean, they have a food chain dilemma that arose in the last 15 years. Mad cow disease. And basically the disease is the byproduct of feeding on your own kind. It seems that some kind of idiot thought it was a good idea to churn beef bone meal into beef food. That's what the earth plane, sort of, I don't mean to be too creepy, but sort of that's what the earth plane is like. It is not, by the way, one of my favorite sleep attributes for what it is. So let's begin with what it is. When we're dealing with the earth plane, we are dealing with the information that we receive through these gates, information that we receive from those on the planet who are awake. That is, the neutrino ocean penetrating them and that information penetrating us. In other words, as we are asleep, we take in the waking world. And obviously this is a very distorted waking world, and you can see what we're dealing with. Mutation, yearning, sex, time, chaos. There is a lot of stuff churning around in this particular plane. Now, for example, somebody who would have this specific activation, in other words, be really activated specifically in this circuit, not be activated elsewhere in this circuit. They're the kind of dreamer in which their dream domain, it is not a pleasant thing at all. Well, it can have its moments, let's put it that way. One should never negate the value of the 50th gate. However, there is a darkness to it because it is all the result of neutrino information that has been filtered by the not-self-consciousness of the planet. And the not-self-consciousness, with its anger, its frustration, its disappointment, its bitterness, its pain, its upheaval, everything that goes along with the living plane. The movement of it, the tension of it, the pace of it, the dilemmas of it, the suffering of it, the deaths. That as you sleep, the dying agonies of the literally tens of thousands that are going to die every day are moving through you. The whole force of the desperation of life. I mean, it would be okay, I guess, if we were in the earth plane simply filtering the highest levels of consciousness from some little monastery in the Himalayas. But we don't. We filter the billions of human beings who do not have, who want, who suffer, who cry out, where no one is heard. We take in the translation of their world through minds that have not been trained, beings that have never been educated, lives that are full of the disjointedness that is so much a part of being human on this planet, though we don't see it. But we dream it. We take it in deep. I mean, the earth plane bites into us and impacts our intelligence system. It's time for a little digression here. The 5027. I mean, the 5027 is an extraordinary instrument of the genetic imperative. I mean, when we see the 5027 within the context of what it is to be human, we see it as a secondary attribute to our fundamental sexuality. In other words, that as a human, it is the 59-6 that establishes who is going to be the partner, who and when is, or with whom is fertility going to be something that is viable, and so forth and so on. There is the reproductive imperative. And in us as humans, the 5027, well, it is about nurturing. But it is about nurturing in terms of the nature of our species. That is, it is not about nurturing in the sense that, the primary function is to make sure that little Johnny or Jane are well fed and clothed. It is far beyond that. That is, given the nature of our species, this is all about the nurturing of intelligence, and within the context of the spleen, nurturing survival intelligence. In other words, the basic ingredient of what's necessary for us as humans on this plane is to be able to survive and to be intelligent enough to develop the strategies necessary for survival and success. All of that is part of what the 5027 is for us as humans. But it's interesting to note that when you look at the 5027 in mammals, that 5027 becomes the equivalent in the mammalian structure to the 59-6. That it is extremely sexual. But it is sexual in a way that is alien to us as humans. That is, it is seasonal. And not only is it seasonal, but this is also the place of the herd instinct. And of course, this is the lower level of ensuring intelligence and nurturing. To make sure that the young are sheltered within the herd, and in being sheltered within the herd, their way of being able to learn from the adults the way things are done. And remember that we enter into the sleep stage in a mammalian infrastructure. And so here in the 5027, some very strange things are at work. And remember that this is being conditioned by the earth plane. This is being conditioned by the waking consciousness of the planet. Many people who will have the 5027 as part of their dream rave, they will have a lot of difficulties with being able to properly maintain energy. Time. If we look at the 50 and the 27, this theme of yearning, which becomes in humanity a theme of greed, of lust, of want, of obsession. And of course, in those dreams, you don't necessarily exhibit it. You get to witness it, you get attacked by it, you get to meet it. I mean, there is a almost like a lashing out on the earth plane. We get such a negative frequency that comes through. I mean, this is nightmare land. This is a place where really frightening things can show up that truly startle. And of course, one of the things that is so strange about the earth plane is that all the patterns get distorted. It's obviously the work of the 5 and the 15 here. But all of the patterns get distorted. I want you to think about percentages for a moment. I want you to think about the fact that the healthiest design while you're sleeping, I mean the healthiest in the sense that it is the least disturbing of programming designs, is to be a reflector in sleep. And to be a reflector in sleep is about 60% of the sleeping population. You know, the tables are turned between the waking and the sleeping life in terms of the percentages. The non-energy types rule in terms of majority. But then, of course, there are going to be those rare exceptions. Now, you can only, as an energy type, in the dream configuration, be a generator. There's no manifestor possible. But you can be a generator. And in being a generator, to understand something about the nature of the motor itself. I mean, everything about a generator and its well-being is about going to sleep exhausted. And yet you go to sleep exhausted and you enter into your dream rave, and there's your sacral, and your sacral is going to be stimulated. It's going to be stimulated. You know, this is one of the most common phenomena. And of course, you know, whether that stimulation in this context is going to be sexual, or whether this stimulation is simply going to be, you know, a kind of, I was going to say adrenaline rush, but I don't want to mix metaphors here. You know, a kind of shocking event in that sense, a shocking change of things. That one way or another, the sacral is going to be engaged, and these beings, when they awaken in the morning, if they're not correct, as they enter into their day, they're quickly going to see that they don't have enough energy. I mean, they're going to feel it. You know, they're going to feel like, you know, they were working all night in their dream. So it's one of the things anyway that we'll see about, you know, next semester when I do dream rave analysis. You know, we'll see how we can apply this information and the way in which, you know, it can, you know, we can provide the mechanics to make it possible for somebody with this kind of configuration to still maintain their proper energy. Most of that is strategy and authority, you know, but so much of it is going to be about their, you know, their diet, because their diet is going to be very important for them to make sure that they have the resources that they need. Most of us, you know, simply become either a reflector or a projector. I'm a projector in my dream rave. You know, and it is, you know, this is one of those areas where, you know, there really is a physical difference if you're an energy type in sleep. Okay, so let me get into a couple of these areas specifically, and actually let us begin with the 15. It is perhaps the most disturbing of dreams. That is the chaos dream, the dream where things are together that don't belong together. Things are all kind of jumbled up. You don't know why this thing is in that thing. You know, there's all this very bizarre decorating, if I can put it that way. It can be very uncomfortable. And one of the things about the chaos programming is, again, to understand that this is what we're receiving from the human consciousness plane, the homogenized plane. And what we're getting here is a spectrum of extremes. And a spectrum of extremes that, you know, we are being influenced with, most of which in the end have to do with the same things. That is the 50-27 where all of this is rooted. In other words, you know, the underlying theme. I mean, Freud got off on the earth plane because, and by the way, he was a 50-27. got off on the earth plane because it is a place where, you have all these, these sexual themes that are buried underneath everything, locked underneath the chaos and so forth. Yet at the same time, the chaos is very unsettling. It's the kind of dream you can wake up from and not be certain where you are, or be deeply grateful that you woke up, to get out of the discomfort of that. What we're feeling is the discomfort of the earth. The discomfort of living consciousness. After all, if you take the 515, which is, the deep thematic of flow, the earthly flow, if everybody was correct and the flow was perfect, I don't think that we would have to call this chaos. It's chaos because this is the earthly extreme permeating us. Now remember something about being permeated by this kind of programming, is that it becomes a basis upon which we measure things. This is what programming does to us. Programming moves all of these things inside of us. We take chaos into our bodies. One of those things about not sleeping with somebody else. Not taking somebody else's dream programming that doesn't have anything to do with you and ending up with all kinds of stuff running through your system that is so unhealthy for you. But it puts it inside of us. So we wake up to a world that we are prepared for in terms of chaos because that's what we're conditioned to expect. This is the homogenized domain. It is chaos. It's our preparation. It is a way to maintain us in the world. I like the time one. Many people do. It's a kind of science fiction one, in a way. Because you can have these... It's not so much about going forward or backward in time. It isn't. It's about time distortion. As I've mentioned, I'm not somebody that has any kind of consistent dream recall. I don't. But I do have certain dreams that have stood out in my life that I remember. And one of them was particularly interesting for me. It was, sometime in the mid-90s, and I think that I was in Bavaria on tour at the time. And I just lost my track. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. I got thinking about something. Anyway, the dream. I'm in San Francisco, of all places, and I hadn't been in San Francisco. I guess it was the year before I had been in San Francisco. And I was in one of these areas where they have these very tall 2 or 3 floor wooden houses with all kinds of wooden stairs going around them. And it was a typical a wooden structure on a hill. And I was standing on one of these stairs. I had just come out a doorway. And as I get out on that stair and I look out from the stair, I look down onto what is a road beside the house. And on the road is an old Buick. It was my family's car when I was, 8 years old, 9 years old. And there's this old Buick, and in front of the Buick, my father is standing there. Now, my father was killed in 1989, so he had already been dead, 6, 7 years at the time of the dream. And standing with my father was Barley Baker, my dog, who died before that time. And I assume, anyway. And so in the dream, I'm looking, and there are these 2 dead creatures and this old car. And, there's this is time distortion. It's pulling objects, entities, people out of different times and reassembling them in the same place. And my father was calling to me, and my dog was wagging its tail. And what I remember so vividly about that dream is that I actually shouted at the two of them and said, "You're dead," well, which is wonderful. And I woke up. But that's time distortion. Often people confuse it with, you can look forward into time and backward. Yes, in a sense, these things do take place. For example, in the time distortion, you can see something within your present configuration, but it's actually an element that hasn't happened yet. Precognition. But precognition locked into what is not its correct environment. But again, this is what time distortion will do. And so there's a great deal of information out there. I think one of the things to really grasp about the earth plane is that if you carry the earth plane in your dream rave, it is so important for you to share your dreams. Share them. And it's one of the most interesting aspects of the earth plane. You see, what you dream on the earth plane is truly not for you. It seems like it can be, but it's not the point. It only seems like it can be because it moves through your particular lens, through your particular filtering. And remember that what you remember of a dream is not what you get while you're dreaming, but how it's moved through the chemistry and ultimately to your self-reflected consciousness. That's a long way to go. Things change along the way. But you see, what is revealed on the earth plane is truly worth sharing. It is the outer authority dream. It is the dream that may be of value to somebody else, and not necessarily in them understanding it, deconstructing it, but simply in hearing it. Like me sharing my dream story with you. Anyway, it is one of the things to keep in mind about the earth plane. For example, if you want to do, because earth plane beings, and again, remember, I don't want you to jump to conclusions because obviously I'm not doing analysis. Nothing is cut and dry. We all know that already. We can talk about circuitries and human design, but it's not like you have people every day that just have one circuit and not another. It's not the way that it works. And all of us are a mix of these aspects, which really changes the way in which it operates. If you only have the 50th gate in your design, yes, you have an earth plane aspect. It's not the same as having a definition. It's not the same as having 2 or 3 gates dominating. It's not the same as if those were the only gates that you have in your dream rave, and so forth and so on. In other words, there's many things to take into consideration, so I don't want you to jump to conclusions. However, strong dream rave, and again we'll have to see it in the context of the lines, very strong earth plane beings. They're going to have, particularly children, they're going to have very difficult dreams. And one of the most important things for these children is to learn how to take pleasure in sharing those dreams, even the scary ones, sharing those dreams with others. In other words, it's very important for them to get it out. This is one of the things about, the nature of the earth plane. So time is very interesting because time carries with it these distortions. When we get to the 50, we get to the theme of sex, and unfortunately, this is the way the program works, that this carries the most disturbing frequency of all, because it is, in fact, the most disturbed frequency that we have on the planet. There is an enormous amount of unfulfilled sexuality in the consciousness field of awake humans. It is a huge energy field. And of course all of this permeates the earth plane through the 50th gate. And of course what that brings into the dreams is that it's not so much that it's bringing, absolute sexuality in the sense that, you're involved in a sexual act or, these kinds of things, which obviously are possible. But no, it's more than that. As a matter of fact, it's deeper than that. It is, it is one of the deepest ways in which we are genetically driven. Genetically driven. It is a way in which our whole sexual drive is rejuvenated while we're asleep. Now, rejuvenated may sound terrific, but then again, the programming level, what that programming quality is, again, it's very, very primitive, and you're taking in the primitive consciousness field, and you're taking in everything that goes along with what is human sexuality. You don't want to even think about what's going on in the world, while you're sleeping, in terms of, what is the sexual plane in all of that. Again, it is very important to get that out. It's, again, the joke about Freud. This is what he was most fascinated with, was discovering all of the sexual innuendo that was there in the dream mythologies that he was looking at. All of that is a direct byproduct of the 50-27. As a matter of fact, intellectually, in its human construct, while he was awake, while he put patients horizontal, he was pulling it out of them. That's a whole other story, but anyway, he was pulling it out of them. The 27th gate. Yearning. It's quite a word. Yearning. It's a burning desire to have, to get, to achieve, to be. It can be painful. The world is without, the majority of humanity, if they could actually be surveyed, would be thumbs down to life on this planet. There is so much to yearn for. Fresh water, safe berths, food supply, clean, education. It goes on and on and on. And then you go backwards and you realize how many human beings are deprived of all of that. It's unbelievable how many human beings are deprived of all of that. It is unbelievable how many female human beings are denied education. Unbelievable. The numbers, unbelievable. The earth plane is soaked with yearning. Soaked with it. Greed, yearning, lust, desire. Soaked with it. This is what you take in. You take in this deep, deep, deep yearning. I want. I need. And you wake up with it. See, the program prepares us for the world that the program gives us. And so much of what we have to do in the world is primitive. Eat, sleep, shit, make love. It's primitive. Old stuff. It's what maintains the world. It's what keeps it going. It's what keeps us going. It's not the neocortex and its fancy concepts. That's not what keeps the world going. And you see, life on this plane is really tough. And so we are programmed to yearn. There is no end to our greed. It's built into all of us while we sleep. It's there to arouse us, move us, force us like good homogenized beings to bend down to all of that and say, no, I am going to get what I want. We are manipulated. We are manipulated by the program in every possible way you can imagine. But here on the earth plane, it goes deep, deep into us. Because we get a taste of the chaos homogenized inside us. We wake up not wanting to be a part of it. We shudder when we see those things someplace else. We thank our lucky stars every day that we do not live such a life, because we carry it inside of it and we're afraid at any moment it could all disappear. And it's not rational. It's how we're programmed. Deep inside of us. Such a power. It's a channel of herding. It herds us all together into that homogenized, never satisfied, always grasping the program at work. I mean, I can say nice things about all of this, sort of. You know, there is always the other side of it. The thing about the earth plane is that it's very revealing. It's why it's very important to share earth plane dreams. One catches glimpses in the Shimera, truths that are afloat in the consciousness field. You get to taste what's coming. I mean, there are many things that are here, but they're all secondary to the goal of the program. Look at that main theme of this circuit. I mean, let alone leave out the 12, because the 12's got a funny trip here. You look at this, what this is. Structuring us to a pattern of yearning. Tying us up in the biological torments of seeking and finding partners, love, all of those things. And locked in based on the fears that have been put into us by the awakening consciousness that is not self and is tormented. And this becomes our foundation for the way in which our consciousness responds to our world. What a flow is being created here. See, and you thought the dreams were like koans that could be interpreted. Oh, is that ever folly? The interpreting is not about the dream. It's one of the things to understand mechanically. So you got to imagine what this transition is. Think about this transition. Whatever the themes are that are taking place for this dreamer, they're taking place in this matrix. And the moment that they awaken, it is over. And that the only way in which this information is actually going to move through this vehicle is chemically, by codons. It's called codon transference. I'll eventually show you the mapping so that you can see how dream information from any gate finds its way into filling up the whole. So there can be an interpretation. Now, they're not the same thing. What we take in the dream state is programming, pure and simple. What we interpret is rooted in the nature of mind and the not-self. And what we are given access to in a limited way through the transference. See, this is about understanding how we're programmed. When we look at analysis, we will look at how to deal with the dilemma of interpretation. But it's the programming that matters. To see the dream state for what it is. To understand what it is. And at the same time, because I do love irony, at the same time understanding that it's okay. I mean, after all, this is the way it is. This is the way that it works. You see, the deeper you understand the power of the program to move you mentally to this position or that position, all of that is essential in order to ensure for you that you recognize how important it is to trust your inner authority and your vehicle and escape the pressure of all this conditioning. Because you can't get away from it. You can't. And if you're somebody that carries the 5027 in your dream rave, it's not like you can get rid of that as an underlying force in the way in which your consciousness is going to relate to the world. But we are not here to be dictated to by our minds. Our minds are for entertainment. Entertainment. Dreams can be deeply entertaining. Truth for us in this life has nothing to do with what our minds think. Truth is what we say yes or no to out of ourselves. Now, that's truth. This funny, distended, this is a cross-special connection. This is a very significant field relationship between humans and mammals, and it is very significant in terms of the dreamers. Each of these circuits has such a gate. We'll look at that in our last week in this semester. But I just want to talk about the 12th gate for a moment and this theme of mutation. Because this theme of mutation is, it's the saving grace, if you will, of the earth plane. The kind of thing where we see it. It happens fairly often. I think the term they give to it is simultaneity. That is, somebody on one side of the planet and somebody on the other side of the planet comes to the same conclusion at the same time. It could be a scientific formula or, whatever the case may be. There is the phenomena of something new emerging, and so quickly does it move through the world, that people know about it so quickly that it's picked up by people all over the place. And, we know the methodologies for that. That is in terms of, we've got the technology, the web, and all of these things. But of course, they're just extensions of what is the underlying source for such a thing. It's here in the 12. The 12 is a deep conditioning receptor to mutation. You see, one of the things about being prepared for the earth plane is to be prepared for the shocks in the homogenized field. And the only way to deal with those shocks is to embrace them as quickly as possible. What was outrageous 20 years ago suddenly becomes gentrified 20 years later. And one of the things about the 12 is that it is here in the dream that one catches something new, catches something emerging. You don't necessarily get to see it in its full packaging. It's just something that's there in your consciousness. And then one day you open up a newspaper and you see some kind of gizmo or gadget or this or that or whatever the case may be. And there's something inside of you that realizes that, yeah, right, that's a great idea. I was thinking about that. That was somewhere inside. It's the way things move. And of course it can be even profounder than that depending on what's at the other end. And of course, that is about the transitional connection that's possible out of the 12. The lines really tell a story. And not only do the lines tell a story, but it is very important to understand the influence of what the color is going to be on these lines. That is, the motivational impact, obviously speaking of this in terms of the personality or the influence ultimately on the personality. The lines give the depth. This is a limited matrix. And the lines are very powerful distinguishing elements because they carry their own dreaming parameters, if you will. And obviously when you're looking at the first line, because of course that name seems to be attractive, secrets, this is the data flow. Secret is just a way of saying that, the data may have yet to reach the consciousness field. There's all kinds of data out there, and when you're tapped into the earth plane, you go deeply, deeply, deeply into the frequency. There's a lot of information in that. Most of it is rather dark, after all. Again, it's the dilemma of the earth plane. You'll see by comparison, the demon realm, which seems to have such a nasty name, is in essence a much more pleasant place than the earth plane. The earth plane is just full of, darkness and turmoil because that's the nature of humanity. It would be lovely if, humanity would get itself together and, clean up its act, and then we would have a very different way in which we would be, impacted by this homogenizing field. Remember, we're not talking about programming. We are talking about homogenizing, getting everybody to feel. Let's put it this way. Think about the earth plane. I just had a funny impression of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Where he goes into the kitchen and he throws endless numbers of things into a blender, and then he turns the blender on and he drinks the whole damn thing. This is what the earth plane is like. That is, the earth plane is all of this waking consciousness field put through a blender, basically. And what you're getting is this blended frequency, and a blended frequency relative to gate and line. But a frequency that you're here to homogenize with. That's the thing that's so interesting about it in terms of, what the earth plane does. The earth plane is always trying to make sure that we awaken to, unfortunately, the world we have. It is our preparation. And you can also see that because of what it puts into us in that sense, and because the consciousness field is not a delight, that you have humanity reinforcing all of this, obviously by operating as not self and making decisions from the mind. See, week after week, year after year, I keep hammering away at strategy and authority because it's such an amazing thing. See, we're helpless when we go to sleep. Truly we're helpless. We're really helpless. We get programmed. We get a good homogenizing dose. We get prepared for what it is to be on this earth plane. Strategy and authority. The waking life is a life where you can be liberated from that. In teaching the morning course I do each Monday, quarter by quarter, I've been talking about the breaking of the covenant. That is, no longer accepting being in the thrall of the program. And we are in its thrall, humanity. Those of us that operate correctly as ourselves, we break that covenant. It does not mean that we can, shield ourselves with armor from the conditioning world. We cannot. It is not possible to do so, nor would it be correct to do so. It is through openness that wisdom is derived. It is through not being controlled by conditioning through the mental plane that one transcends on this plane. There is no altering that the deepest programming we receive is while we are unconscious. There is no altering that. There is no intervention that can take place in that. There is none. There is simply what it means to awaken and to understand that your life is dependent on your correctness, because you don't have a chance if you're operating from the mental plane. You just don't have a chance, because all the odds are against you, all of them. You're caught in the conditions that the program establishes. You think you can escape the 50-27 effect in your life? Ever? On the mental plane? Ever? No. Never. Never. We are saturated with it every night. Saturated with it. The pain, the yearning, the want, the need, the greed, the sex, all of it. The homogenized in a blender frequency of humanity. Whoa. And don't just think of us as victims, because when we're up and they're asleep, we give it to them. At least there's some of us who are not embodiments of the chaos of the physical plane. It makes a difference to the earth plane. Every dreamer that lives correctly changes the earth plane. They no longer carry the same frequency. I want to take you back to something very basic in human design. And that is the work of the magnetic monopole. The magnetic monopole, it holds us together in the illusion of our separateness. That illusion of separateness that we call ourself is a synthesized frequency. It is this frequency that determines what kind of life we're going to have. If the frequency is not correct, we never get to derive the cognition that we deserve. We do not operate correctly, and we are lost in the homogenized plane. When our frequency is correct, then everything is possible for us. We align our frequency by operating according to strategy and authority. Now, obviously, when you're asleep, you are no longer able to operate according to your strategy and authority. And that when you're asleep on the earth plane, you are looking at the influence directly of the magnetic monopole, 15th gate, magnetism, and that you're seeing here that there is a frequency that is being established while you're asleep that you must correct when you awaken. You're given the not-self frequency. It's what fills you while you're sleeping. And that frequency influences the illusion of what you are, changes the frequency of the whole, and then you awaken. And if you awaken as not self, you certainly stay there. The frequency permeates you. There is no correction that takes place. There is no alignment that takes place. The mind takes over. The mind dictates the strategy for the day. All of it being driven by the forces underneath. Oh, are we ever in the spider's web, you know? When I first started to teach, I avoided teaching the not-self. I thought, you know, if I really teach them what the not-self is, if I really teach them how pervasive the program is, I may lose their attention. You know? It is so pervasive. It is so deep. It is so insidious. See, I have had a visceral dislike, visceral reaction to traditional dream analysis. I mean, you know, that's the gloss. You know, it's the magician, you know, who lets you see only what they want you to see. But everything else is going on behind your back. You know, it's the chimera to distract us from what's really going on. So everybody thinks that there's something important in the dream, you know? Instead of seeing it for what it is. That we are programmed. And it's not like the earth plane is the only villain in the story. The whole dream setup is that way. This side and that side, you know. The agenda of the program at work. And at work in, you know, a helpless creature. Unconscious. And it's not about saying, okay, you know, there must be something we can do. No. It's the most incredible thing about being us. I mean, we are here to be passengers. We are here to watch the movie, and the movie is the program. We are here to watch, to see it, not to interfere with it, not to be driven by it, but to see it. And in our waking life, for us to be absolutely correct, no mind, no authority of mind, totally stripped of its power. See, when you wake up in the morning and your mind is used to the fact that it has no authority over you, you're not going to wake up with a distorted frequency. It can only take root in a disturbed mind. And when I say disturbed, I just simply mean a mind that's trying to figure out what to do. If you got a mind that's trying to figure out what to do, it is disturbed. And waking up in the morning isn't going to relieve it of its disturbance. It's just going to add continued pressure and fear. You know, when we are dealing with the 50th gate and we're dealing with the potential of the spleen, we're dealing with the deepest visceral fears that we have. Real fear. And all these fears of not having, all these fears of having things taken away, all these fears of the pattern and the flow breaking down, All these fears of a world in which the world is breaking down, pouring through. When you're being fed over and over again, the same homogenized construct, it's very hard to escape it. It's very hard to escape it. I'm always drawn back to what it is to individuate and to fulfill one's determination in this life. And it is something to recognize that you can only live your life correctly while you are awake. I guess there's a joke in there somewhere, but it's true. You cannot be correct in sleep. You're not there. You're not at attention. You are truly not seeing. You are simply cut off and being programmed. But when you're awake, when we are awake, we have our opportunity. The possibility that is there for each of us now, to break the covenant with the program, with the mind, this bargain we have had for millennia with the mind. You tell me what to do, mind, that bargain. It's only when you break with that bargain that you can find any kind of freedom. Any kind. See, we're not here to invest our consciousness in sleep. It's, I understand that dream rave is an interesting subject, but you can tell it's not one that I have bothered to teach a lot. And frankly, I teach it at this stage because I've done so much work in trying to lay the foundation for the understanding of how pervasive the influence of the program is. Because it's only within this context that we can begin to look realistically at what, if any, personal value is there in a dream configuration in terms of how we can analyze it, so that we can understand that there is a mechanical formula that will emerge as personal dream myth. But I just see it as another instrument of the program to keep us sheep-like, to fill us with the same fears, to drive the same greed system, sexual system, to load us up every day with the pollution of not self-consciousness, so that we cannot breathe what is possible, never letting go of us, never giving us a chance. But then again, all things provide opportunities. Everything. The joke about the silver lining. There's always some kind of silver lining. The silver lining is our time. Cycle of the cross of planning. Near the gateway of 2027. This time in which inner truth and the fulfillment of purpose and knowledge is possible. And all of it is about liberating oneself from the influence of the program. All of it. How to make decisions as yourself. Human design. Not how to live in the world according to the program. Well, the earth plane. It is Not the kind of stuff I like to drink out of a blender, but nonetheless, I fulfill the dynamics of the program. Go to sleep, wake up, and in my waking state, I exist as myself. And the mind, not important. Okay, so much for the earth plane. For those of you that are approaching nighttime, I hope you have wonderful dreams tonight, or something like that. And next week we will look at the deeply delicious demon realm. Does that give you an appetite for it? Yeah, anyway. Okay. All of you, wherever you are, you take care. Enjoy the movie.